All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you all so much for being here. My name is Amanda Bebrin. I am the Director of Housing Advocacy at the CDP, and this is the second workshop in the Lower Cape Housing Institute for the 2023-2024 year. Purpose of the Lower Cape Housing Institute is to provide resources, training, and support to our local municipal officials, elected, appointed staff, resident advocates, anyone who cares about housing, to talk about why it's so important to have affordable housing and to develop some appropriate strategies for towns to work towards their housing production goals. Today, I am so excited about this session. Today's session is called Beyond the Usual Suspects: Addressing Barriers to Participation for Community Engagement. Our towns have a lot of local control over what happens, but we don't always get everyone who we need in the room. So we have two fabulous presenters with us today who are going to talk about the importance of community engagement and some ways that we can reach out to populations that are sort of underrepresented in municipal decision making, and how that leads to better outcomes for all of us long term. I am thrilled to be joined today by Linke from CHAPA and Kassie Infante from AHMA. And they are going to take us through just a fabulous workshop today. And as I said, we will leave some time at the end for some Q&A. So if everyone leaves themselves muted until then, I will be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in there and we'll answer your questions at the end. And I will turn it over to Lily.
Thanks, Amanda. Good morning. Nice to see some familiar faces, some new faces, and thanks so much for having me. All right, so I will be kicking us off today. Kassie will be taking the second half after me, and my presentation, is going to focus on kind of laying out some of the basics of why community engagement is so important and why it can be so difficult to really get truly representative participation in these spaces, and what can we do about that. So I'll tell you a little bit about CHAPA if you're not familiar with us and our municipal engagement initiative, and then take you through the rest of my presentation. So Citizens Housing and Planning Association's mission is to encourage the production and preservation of housing that is affordable to low and moderate income families and individuals, and to foster diverse and sustainable communities through planning and community development. So we do this in a lot of different ways. We advocate for opportunity through our policy team, drafting and advocating for legislation at the State House. We expand access to housing through our programs team. We actually monitor and manage affordable housing, ensuring compliance, running the lottery. We develop the field through a broad range of forums, convenings, bringing together different stakeholders. And we also do local community organizing. We believe that Massachusetts should be a place where our communities nourish us and help us grow. And right now, housing is the single best investment every community across the state can make to secure the future we all want and deserve. We believe that a diverse mix of homes in every part of Massachusetts plants the seeds of our long-term success by protecting our environment, improving our overall health, improving the quality of our children's education, strengthening our economy, and building wealth for everyone. The Municipal Engagement Initiative is our local community organizing wing, of which I am a part. And the Municipal Engagement Initiative was founded in 2018 in response to what we saw really as a need for more on-the-ground support for pro-housing voices at the local level. As Amanda said at the beginning, housing is really made or broken at the local level. And oftentimes those opposed to creating new housing are well organized, well resourced, have potentially already a little bit of say in the community. Maybe they're in a position of power, and we really need that same level of energy for our pro-housing voices. I skipped one slide. So we do this through a big tent coalition building model. We really encourage all of our coalitions to push beyond those usual folks that we know. Every community has that dozen people that you can always count on to be at every meeting when it comes to housing. But But we need to expand beyond that. So make sure that we're bringing local business owners, civic groups, groups like the League of Women Voters have been an amazing partner for us in a lot of communities. Service providers, folks who are actually connecting folks with housing and food and other resources. Houses of worship, faith groups and faith leaders are incredible partners. Environmental and transit advocates, folks who might not necessarily see themselves as housing advocates, but are engaged in their community in one of the many. I mean, housing touches everything. So no matter what they're interested in, there's a way that you can help bridge that with housing, schools, climate, transportation, infrastructure, et cetera. And bringing in cultural groups, whether it's, if you have a Main Streets organization that's putting together community events or, some kind of arts institution, really trying to bring as many voices into the conversation as possible, because we all need housing and we all have a voice in that conversation. So why do we feel like this work of bringing together pro-housing voices is so important? Because the reality on the ground is that the folks who are showing up to these meetings are really not representative of our communities, both demographically and in terms of their beliefs and what they're there to do. So Neighborhood Defenders was a report that came out of BU. It was research done by Dr. Catherine Einstein, David Glick, and Maxwell Palmer. I really strongly recommend checking out their website, housingpolitics.com. They have a whole book you can read, a lot of different reports as well you can access for free online. But they observed thousands of hours of public meetings on housing across Massachusetts. And they found that over and over again, communities of all sizes, regions, attendees do not represent the community as a whole. And again, they are overwhelmingly older, more likely to be white, more likely to be male, and more likely to be homeowners, as opposed to the general population. And they are overwhelmingly there to oppose new developments. And these trends persist in both high and low cost cities. And often within a community, opposition in wealthier neighborhoods can push development into lower income neighborhoods, which exacerbates gentrification and displacement. When the researchers looked at the difference between those who were showing up to these meetings to comment and registered voters, which of course registered voters aren't even representative of the whole community, because people who are undocumented, people who are not yet 18, people who maybe just recently moved to the community, haven't re-registered at their new address. There's a lot of folks that are not included in that voter demographic. But just looking at commenters versus voters, you can see that women are underrepresented, white residents are overrepresented, and folks over 50 and homeowners are significantly overrepresented. So, homeowners, for example, only make up just under half of voters in the communities they looked at, but they make up 3/4 of commenters. And across the board, over and over again, the majority of folks who were coming to these meetings were there to oppose multifamily housing. Even in communities where support was the highest, they still couldn't quite pass that 50% threshold, which is really the bare minimum you need in order to be able to move forward. There's also a big difference in the level of support by race and by homeownership status. So you can see, white homeowners are less likely to support new housing compared to white non-homeowners. Black residents, both homeowners and non-homeowners, are significantly more likely to support projects sort of across the board. But in every group, there is a definite, a clear difference between homeowners and non-homeowners. So what does this mean for us to do? We know this, but how can this impact and shape the way we approach our community engagement strategy, knowing that there's already this kind of unevenness out there? So when I am consulting with communities to support their engagement efforts, I always want to start with like a little bit of reflection and setting some goals for that community engagement process. So, what are the end goals of this? What is your timeline? Is this something you only have a few months to do, something you have years to do? How much of a priority is it for, I used apartment in this slide, referencing folks who are municipal staff, but for resident advocates, what is it a priority for your coalition or whatever, your nonprofit? What kind of staff capacity, people power do you have to put towards it? What kind of relevant skill sets do you already possess? Do you have folks that are experienced in facilitation? Maybe they have an education background, people who are comfortable with more of the communications piece, social media, graphic design, and who within the team is going to be taking the lead. So really setting clear parameters and expectations for yourself, because as you'll see as I go through this, there's so many different ways you can approach community engagement at all levels of intensity and depth in terms of how much work it takes, how much time it takes. And it can be a little overwhelming because ideally, I think we would all have tons and tons of time to engage every person in every way possible. But the reality is that we do have to be thoughtful and strategic with our time. So having a sense of what you're working with to begin with can hopefully set yourself up for success. Also taking that time to look back at any recent efforts you've undertaken. So, if you're trying to make a big zoning change or bring in a 40B, are there any comparable or relevant projects that you have taken on in the past 10 years that might give you a little bit of a peek into what kind of challenges you came up across last time and what you might be able to do proactively this time around to hopefully mitigate some of that? So who was involved? Who did you struggle to get in the room? Were you able to reach beyond the usual suspects? Was the conversation, dominated by white homeowners? If so, how did that maybe impact the outcome that you had? Were there any notable opponents, folks you should be prepared for to be able to have conversations with? Even more important, were there any supporters that you can lean on in this process, folks who have demonstrated themselves to be committed to this and willing to put some time into it? Where were those moments where you accidentally put your foot in your mouth, and how can we be more prepared this time around? So, and also just thinking more broadly about your general experience with community engagement efforts. Is there a certain format of a meeting that really worked that you would like to return to again, or something that really went kind of awry, and how can you avoid that this time around? Are there resources that you wish you'd had? Oh, I wish we'd had a budget for translation, or I wish we had spent more time doing outreach to get more people into the room, etc. And the other thing that I encourage folks to do when they're starting to put together a strategy, as you've thought about your capacity, looked back on what's gone well and what you've struggled with in the past, now thinking ahead to the process in front of you, whatever that project might be that you're doing community engagement for, who's going to be most impacted by it? Because those are really the first people that we want to be talking to. Renters, people of color, youth under 25 is a demographic that can be really, really challenging for a lot of communities to get involved. Parents of young children, people with disabilities, people with low or no income, residents of public housing or deed restricted affordable housing, local business owners, civic groups, faith groups, who is going to be most impacted by this? Because it is often the people who would benefit most from new housing that are unable to participate in these meetings for a variety of reasons. But I think some of the barriers that I have heard from folks the most are time, ultimately, work and family commitments, particularly for working parents with young children, insufficient outreach, relying on only, maybe one form of media, just putting it on the town website, but not putting it in the local paper or putting it on cable access or putting it on social media. Bureaucratic gatekeeping. A lot of these processes are very technical, they're very long. And if someone's coming into the third meeting of a process, the planning process is going to take a year, there's a lot of catching up that they need to do. And it can be really hard to kind of jump in. And I think often we don't make it easy for them. So how can we make it as easy as possible for people to get the information they need to be able to meaningfully participate? Language barriers, of course, translation, knowing which languages are most frequently, languages other than English are most common in your community, being prepared to provide translation for that, a sense of efficacy. People, will often feel like, okay, sure, I went and I did my comment, but they didn't do what I wanted them to do. And so I'm not going to waste my time with that again. So how can you demonstrate to folks that even if they don't see the exact outcome that they're hoping for, that their voice still played a really important role in the process? Harassment, unfortunately, is becoming more and more of a thing that we are seeing. One piece to kind of set the context for that is in, I want to say March of this year, our state Supreme Court ruled to protect offensive, rude, or hateful language in public meetings. This came out of a lawsuit in the town of Southborough. A resident had brought against the town because she was removed from a meeting for using rude and offensive language, including comparing a planning board member to Hitler, among other things. And the Supreme Court found that she was protected. That speech was protected, and that removing her from that meeting was unconstitutional. So it has brought a lot of questions into a lot of planners' minds of like, okay, where is the line? And at what point am I allowed to ask someone to leave? But we're seeing people push those buttons and really kind of see where the line is. And so, if you're a resident who hasn't gone to a lot of meetings and you show up to a meeting and the environment is as tense and frankly nasty as it can sometimes get, that's not a very welcome place to be, especially if you are yourself, a renter, a resident of public housing, and you come to a meeting where people are saying really terrible and offensive things about people who live in public housing. That's not going to be a space where you feel comfortable standing up and sharing your opinion. And then, of course, there are folks who, maybe were pushed out of town, priced out of town, and really want to come back. But because they don't currently live there, they're not, technically eligible as residents to provide that kind of feedback. And folks who would like to move, but can't because they can't afford to. So now that I've laid out all of the reasons that folks struggle to participate, what can we do about that to try to ameliorate some of that? So first, thinking about our outreach and communications, trying to, break past that insufficient outreach barrier, creating dedicated project web pages for some of those more involved long-term processes is so helpful to have a one-stop shop where people can go for all of their updates. So oftentimes, I spend a lot of time on a lot of municipal websites, and sometimes information can be very scattered and it can be hard to find. It's like, oh, this link takes me to a planning board meeting, but then that takes me to this other entirely different web page. And then there's a new link that takes me out of the town page altogether. So having it all in one place where it's like, okay, here's recordings of all the meetings, here's links to all the presentations, here's some background context on what this project even is, why we're doing it, here's links to other resources. Say you're trying to pass an accessory dwelling unit bylaw. Here's a link to an awesome resource from AARP about accessory dwelling units. Just one place where people can get all of their information can really streamline that for folks and make it much easier to just have one link to give people. Utilizing a variety of media, so obviously the project webpage, but also social media, cable access, local papers, flyers. I know a lot of communities have lost their local papers, but it does seem like at least pretty much all the communities that I'm working with still at the very least have like a local cable access. And I've had a lot of success both advertising meetings through there, but also, having planners go on to the local cable access show to talk about a project. We found that has been really effective. Strategic outreach to known advocacy groups. So if you have, a known affordable housing group or some of those other stakeholders I mentioned, civic groups like the League of Women Voters, anyone who has shown themselves in the past to be a pro-housing voice, make sure that you are leaning on them, leaning on their networks, because these folks are trusted by their community. Who are the people in your community that when they speak, folks listen to them? Those are the people that we want to be engaging with early on and getting on board with the process. Meeting people where they are, so tabling and flyering at community events. Oh, no, I would not like an update. Thank you. One moment. Perfect time for a little computer update. Okay, we'll do that one more time. No, that's not the one. Okay, there we go. So meeting people where they are, farmers markets, festivals, little league games, rather than asking someone to come down to town hall, bring it to where they already are. Translating materials, if you're putting together a flyer or some kind of social media graphic, keeping your language concise, making it visual, just give people that basic information they have to have, and then, tease them to make them want to learn more. Creating a mailing list for people who are interested. So you can, update them like, hey, we're having a planning board meeting next week where there's going to be an opportunity for comment, come and voice your support. Here's, ideally, maybe there's a little template you can share with them so that they don't have to come up with something from scratch. And then including a QR code. So if you're making a flyer, having something where in that moment, someone can pull out their phone, pull up the link, and sign up right away before they walk away and forget. And creating QR codes is actually very easy. If you just Google create QR code, there's all kinds of websites that you just plug in a link and it'll make a custom one for you. Okay, there we go. I think now we're fully back. All right. So as you think about your outreach, some of my messaging best practices, make sure you're avoiding overly technical and wonky language. There's a time and a place for that. And we want to get folks familiar with some of that terminology that they're going to be hearing a lot. But in that initial outreach, you want to be using language that's accessible and familiar to people, much more likely to kind of catch their eye. Make sure you explain the why. Why is this project happening? Why is this meeting happening? Why does it matter? How is it going to meet your goals around affordable housing? Create some motivation behind the just come to this meeting because we need you. Speaking to people's values, we can often get caught up in the wonky quantitative piece of it. This is going to create X many units at XYZ affordability levels, which is going to contribute to this goal in our housing production plan and, get us at this point on the subsidized housing inventory. All of that is important and stuff we're thinking about in our planning. But when we're trying to get new folks to show up to meetings, we want to be speaking to their values and not just to the numbers, especially for folks beyond the usual suspects. They're going to be a lot more drawn in when we just, talk human to human. Focusing on the positives. What are the benefits of this policy? I think we can often, particularly when it comes to something that we know is maybe going to be a little controversial, we can come into these meetings almost sort of already in a defensive position, like it's not going to be that bad, I swear. But when we come in, even though I totally get why people do that, because anyone who works at the municipal level has been yelled at in a lot of meetings before, and that can wear on you and make you want to come in sort of already, in a protective posture. But it does not set us up for success in terms of selling the thing that we are proposing. The detractors, they will be there, they will have their points. We don't need to make it for them. We can come in with our, positive, future-focused message, be prepared for the detractors. We know what they're going to say. We can be prepared to respond to it. But when we're proactively saying, but don't worry, it won't raise your taxes, or, but don't worry, it won't lower your home values, we're unnecessarily bringing those negative talking points into the conversation. Utilizing stories and visuals. I have a whole other presentation I do about the power of storytelling for case making and social change. So maybe I'll come back next year and do that one. But don't get too caught up in the data, as I said before. It's incredible what a difference it can make. I think back to Chatham 365 is an awesome group. I don't know if anyone here is affiliated with them, but they did a storytelling series a few years ago where they interviewed different residents and had it in the local paper, stories about folks who, maybe had grown up in Chatham but had been priced out. Or I remember there was one woman who was a local business owner and she was having a lot of trouble retaining employees because folks just couldn't find anywhere that they could afford to live. And things like that it's a much more visceral understanding of the actual impact of the lack of housing rather than just a chart that shows housing production. Getting your message out there first, correcting misinformation, but not getting caught in that back and forth. You can acknowledge the misinformation, you can, get the facts straight, make sure that's on the website, but not getting into a back and forth with folks who are not arguing in good faith. So when it comes, this is all before we've even gotten into a meeting with people. This is just when we're preparing to reach out to people and hopefully get them to the meeting. But once they're there, how can we eliminate some of those barriers to getting that meaningful participation? So offering multiple sessions on different days of the week and different times of day, maybe one virtual, one in person, maybe they're all hybrid, both weekday evenings for folks who work 9 to 5, but also weekday during the daytime, Saturday mornings, thinking about, different folks' schedules and how you can fit into that. Being thoughtful about the location. Is it easy to access without a car? Are you providing signage so folks can easily find the room? Is it a welcoming environment? For example, depending on who you're trying to reach and, a lot of different factors, like maybe holding it at a library or an elementary school is going to be a more welcoming environment than holding it at a police station. There are some people who might not feel comfortable going into a police station, but would feel more comfortable going into a library or a, council on aging. And meeting people where they are. So, getting folks into meetings is awesome, but there's also lots of ways that you can gather public feedback more informally, brief surveys, visioning exercises. You're at a table at the farmer's market. You can bring some stuff with you, give people the opportunity to put a pin on the map for where they'd like to see multifamily housing, or share their own. I went to an event once where they had a bunch of prompts, like how much, there was a spectrum from 0% to 100%. How much of your gross income do you spend on rent? And people could put a pin where they fell on that spectrum. And you could see where the clusters were of, wow, a lot of my neighbors are spending 50% of their income on rent. And seeing that live and seeing my neighbors participate in it, I think was very impactful, and probably more so than just seeing a graph on a slideshow. Providing resources that, make it easier to participate, that get at some of those barriers. Food is amazing for people who genuinely need it. It's really critical, but even for those who are not food insecure, good old pizza really brings people out. It's amazing what pizza can do. And ideally, also depending on the demographic you're trying to reach, like culturally sensitive food as well, thinking about like what might people, be most interested in eating is ideal. Childcare is huge. For folks with young children, it's probably going to be pretty infeasible for them to make it out to a meeting on a weekday evening if there's no childcare. Translation, stipends for participation can be a huge incentive. We did a workshop series. It was 4 workshops on zoning in Chelsea. All of these resources were provided: food, childcare, translation, and stipends. And across the 4 sessions, we had between 80 and 100 people at every session, and 80% of the folks participating were Spanish speaking, utilizing the translation. Almost everyone who came took us up on our offer for a gift card. The food was decimated. We had dozens of kids at the childcare. And it was so clear what a difference it made to have those resources in terms of who was able to show up and participate. Lots of parents with young children, family, we even had some teenagers come. It was awesome. And setting the stage for success. So having, thinking back to that bureaucratic gatekeeping, having fact sheets to make sure that people are informed, providing a clear explanation about the process. Like, what are we actually even here to meet about? What are the goals? Oftentimes you come into a planning board meeting and it's just like, okay, we're off to the races. And if you're not a regular attendee at planning board meetings, like, good luck following what's going on. And creating a code of conduct or a set of group agreements can be a great way to kind of set some guardrails around, like, how are we sort of expected to treat each other in this space? So I have a few examples of some of those things. So when it comes to putting together a fact sheet, here are some example super duper simple ones I made in Canva. If you've never used Canva, strongly recommend checking it out, canva.com. I am not a graphic designer, but you pick templates and you can just plug in your own text. You can plug in images, but these are all super duper simple, nothing fancy ones I put together. On the left here, we have your basic, what is affordable housing? This is a template I've given to communities to go and plug in their own information for their town, breaking down some of the basics of, accessory dwelling units. This one on the left was on the right was a fact sheet I made for one of our coalitions in Foxborough that was trying to get a housing production plan passed. So they put together a series of frequently asked questions where, in this case, they asked some school administrators about school capacity and school funding. And I think this one was particularly effective because the answers were coming from school administrators who have no skin in the housing game. They're not coming at it as housing advocates. So their responses are seen as unbiased. Some examples of the ground rules that I mentioned, having these posted somewhere, like reading them aloud and also having them posted physically, or if you're virtual, put it in the chat so you can refer back to them. Being really clear, what are we here to talk about? By the end of this meeting, what do we want to have accomplished? And I think one of our planner friends in Reading recently gave a presentation that I've been talking about because I just love it. At the beginning of the agenda, he laid out, what this meeting is about. Here's what we're here to talk about. But he also talked about, here's what we're not here to talk about. And he had a list of topics that were not on the agenda. We're not here to argue about whether or not we're going to undertake this process. We're here to do the work. And we are not here to talk about whether or not we should do the work. And I just think that was great. And I'm going to start doing that at all my meetings. Setting the context for where in the process are we? Okay, this is the third meeting of a 6-meeting series. Here's what's already happened. Here's what's going to happen. Here's what you have the opportunity to weigh in on tonight. Being thoughtful about who is facilitating. Who is speaking often has more to do with how it's received than what they're saying. So making sure that whoever's facilitating is the right messenger. Managing expectations, make sure folks know, is there going to be time for questions? Is there going to be a public comment? If so, what are the rules around that? I've been in a lot of meetings that are public hearings where folks ask for their 2 minutes, but then they just ask a series of questions. And then they're confused and frustrated when they don't get their questions answered because they don't understand that it's not a back and forth in a public hearing. But if you haven't gone to a lot of public hearings, I totally understand how someone wouldn't know that. Acknowledging tensions that may already exist, especially if it's a sort of spicy topic, if you will, if there have been other meetings that have gotten a little intense, and then referring back to those ground rules if they need to be clarified. Some group agreements that I think can be part of those ground rules. Asking that folks be fully present, if they're in person, put away screens. If it's virtual, asking folks to turn their camera on if they're able to. Using I statements, asking that when folks share a comment that they stick to I statements, that they try not to make it about other people in the room. Take space, make space. If you're talking a lot, try to take a step back. If you haven't shared yet, try to bolster up the courage to say something. Avoiding jargon. I say that a couple times in this presentation because it's so important. Sharing the lesson, not the story. So not sharing personal information about people who aren't in the space. But if there is something to take from their experience, sharing that without, giving details about a person that isn't there and able to consent about that. Assuming good intent when someone says something that maybe doesn't quite hit you right, before jumping to the worst possible conclusion, maybe asking some additional questions, trying to get some clarification, paying attention to like, what's going on inside me that is making me feel this way, and where can I maybe try to bridge this divide. Recognizing that no one knows everything, no one has all the answers or all the information, but together we know a lot, and thinking outside the box. When you are facilitating these meetings, being prepared for how you're going to manage difficult conversations, even if you don't think you'll need to, having a plan in place, prioritize reaching out to the unusual suspects. Transparency is so key. Stating the goals, stating the expectations, making sure people understand why they're here, giving that context, setting the stage for folks, ensuring that people recognize they are being heard. I'm a big fan of taking notes publicly. So if it's an in-person meeting, having a big, one of those big sticky note pads and like actually taking notes in front of folks, or if it's virtual, sometimes I might, depending on the format of the meeting, I might have like my Google Doc up on the screen. I think when people can see that what they're saying is actually being taken down, that is affirming that it's being heard. It's also an opportunity, if I write something that folks are like, that doesn't feel quite accurate to how I meant it, then it's also an opportunity for clarification. Making sure that you always end with, okay, well, here's what's coming next. Here's the next opportunity for you to be involved, rather than just saying, thanks, bye, and probably never seeing them again. And taking care of yourself and your staff. These meetings can often become emotional. Sometimes they can get quite personal. Staff are on the front lines. So when you do have a hard meeting, making sure you take the time to debrief, check in with anyone who maybe was having a hard time, and just make sure you're giving them that support. So I know I'm running long, but I'm going to be quick on these last few ones. I promise, Kassie. Quickly, a few sort of the pros and cons of the various community engagement meeting formats when it comes to equity. The classic open public meeting, the thing we're all so well acquainted with. It has strengths. You can often get a lot of folks in the room at once, disseminate information widely, get direct feedback through a public hearing. It is an opportunity to build trust if you do it right. And they can be less intensive to plan in the sense that they're less interactive. But public hearings can be very nerve-wracking for people who are new to advocacy. There are all those barriers to attendance, if it's in person or even, virtually sometimes, depending on the time. There's no real way to know who will show up. I've been to lots of meetings that are much smaller than we hoped for, and others where it's like, oh, wow, we're at the fire marshal is going to come because we're beyond capacity for the building. And it can be difficult to contain if things get rowdy. That mob mentality can take over pretty quick. Panels, forums, and webinars are a more sort of directly educational way to engage people in the process. Bringing in an outside expert can create a little space for planning staff, although I'll say that I have, depending on the community, I've seen it go both ways. Sometimes bringing in an expert, folks are like, see them as almost maybe less biased than a planning staff member, or they're not coming in with preconceived notions. Other times it can totally backfire and it's like, who's this person coming and telling us what to do? So being, know your community and how they might respond. You can always record the event and post it on your webpage, and it can continue to be useful in the future. But depending on the topic and who the panelists are in the format, you might not necessarily reach beyond the usual suspects. It might be the same people who always want to learn about housing, but I think a well-crafted forum or webinar can bring in new people. And it is more intensive to plan. Live interpretation can also be challenging and is more intensive than translating. So something to budget for, because live interpretation can be quite expensive. Interactive events. Here's actually a photo from that Chelsea zoning workshop I mentioned. That hands-on participation that Kassie is going to talk to us about is so vital for building trust between the municipality and their residents, building community between residents is that, maybe you're sitting next to a neighbor you've never talked to before, working on something with them. But it is, I would say, of the ones I've spoken about so far, the most time intensive in terms of you typically need more staff present to be able to facilitate those conversations, to run some of the activities. There's a little bit more setup involved, materials to gather. I certainly think that additional effort is worth it and pays dividends in terms of the quality of feedback that you get. But it does definitely require more preparation. Focus groups, I think, can be a really nice sort of happy medium where you're able to have these small intentional conversations. I've seen more and more communities doing focus groups with specific stakeholders, like, okay, this is our local business owner focus group. This is our renter focus group. This is our youth under 25 focus group, which I think is great because for those folks who might not feel comfortable at a larger meeting, knowing that they're going to be with people who have a shared experience as them might make them feel a little bit more comfortable sharing honestly. The challenges around focus groups are that folks who are used to being at the center of the conversation are likely going to be mad if you are intentionally reaching out to those who are not typically at the center of the conversation. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but it is something to be prepared for, that you might have folks saying, well, why am I not allowed to participate in this? In Newton, they did a series of focus groups with different underrepresented groups. And there were a lot of older white homeowners who were quite angry that there was no focus group for them, forgetting that, the whole world is their focus group. But they were trying to hack the system. They had one focus group for artists. And so a NIMBY group got together and was like, we're all going to sign up for this focus group and just pretend that we're artists. Cause you can't, it's hard to pretend to be a different age or a different race, but you can say yeah, I'm a painter. It, just as a heads up, being prepared for potential tricks like that. Surveys, I think, are a great way for more asynchronous, broad engagement where people don't need to be at a certain place at a certain time. They can participate whenever is convenient for them. You can get, I think it's best used for soliciting feedback on specific proposals. It can be hard, I think, to craft a well-done survey that's really broad and kind of I don't think that's the place where people think outside the box and do their best dreaming. I think that kind of work is much better done hands-on in person, but it's a great way to give people here's a fixed menu of options and what do you like the most amongst them? And then doing that really intensive outreach to try to get as representative responses as possible. Asking folks to share information like age, race, are you a homeowner or not, is a helpful way to be able to sense how representative is the feedback you're getting. So in conclusion, if you take away anything from this, I hope you remember to take the time to understand your community context. Who are those usual suspects? Who's missing? Who's going to be most impacted? Build partnerships with trusted community organizations. Learn from and with underrepresented communities, not just about them. Meet people where they are. Make no assumptions about what people do or don't know. Set yourself up for success by setting clear expectations. Provide resources that make participation not just possible, but easy and ideally even fun. Encourage you to get creative, push yourself to think beyond traditional public meetings. And remember that this is a practice. It is not going to all happen at once, but if we can incorporate some of these bit by bit, I promise that you will start to see a shift in who you're reaching in these conversations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kassie to hear about how they're doing this work at Abundant Housing.
Thank you, Lily. If folks could just give Lily a little round of applause, either with the reaction emoji or just live, that would be awesome. That was so incredibly valuable. And I'm so excited to dive deeper into a few different tactics that we have found to be helpful at Abundant Housing. So let me just share my screen. Give me one moment here. Excellent. So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation, Amanda. I'm so excited to be with you all. I hope everyone is finding ways to take care. My name is Kassie Infante. I am a Merrimack Valley native, so I live in Haverhill. I'm a current member of the Zoning Board of Appeals here. I'm a former elected school board member. And I'm also now the Associate Director of Operations at Abundant Housing, Massachusetts. And basically what I want to offer today is really just building off of the great information that Lily gave us and offer a new approach to community engagement that's tactical, that's hands-on, and that's creative, and have some generative conversation. I also have a little bit of a hands-on activity. So for folks that are feeling excited to participate, would love to hear from you near the end. And before we jump into all of that, would just like to share a little bit more about who we are at Abundant Housing Massachusetts. We are a statewide pro-housing network of advocates. We have just over 400 members across the state. And we believe that Massachusetts is for everyone and that every community should be open and welcoming to folks through their housing options. Unfortunately, we know that that's not a reality. And so we basically build the capacity of advocates on the ground to stand up for abundant housing in their community. This is our team on the right-hand side. We are a small but mighty team. I think Joyce Mandel, one of our organizers, is in the audience. So shout out, Joyce. Thank you for being here. And so what does that look like in practice? Well, we advocate for more diverse housing near transit and jobs, robust tenant protections to prevent displacement, reform of exclusionary zoning rules, sustainable development practices and communities, as well as robust funding of social and subsidized housing. And again, we really do that work by organizing and building the grassroots capacity of over 400 members, as well as affiliated pro-housing groups. And so one of our goals is to build more representative pro-housing groups that can address challenges at the local level. And why do we do our work? Well, our vision, of course, is to create more abundant housing options for everyone. We want a housing market that lets people move when they want, where they want, not when they have to or when they're forced to. Our vision is to create communities with racially and economically diverse residents, development patterns that facilitate low or no carbon lifestyles. And we also effectively, through our work, want to educate on the history of racial segregation and translating that into effective organizing tools, really from the grassroots perspective. So today, Lily did such a great job of explaining, why and how we really need to rethink some of our more traditional forms of community engagement and why those let us down. I want to share just a little bit more context to a few of these issues as we get into the Dream Play build. And essentially, the first thing I want to talk about is that oftentimes our planning processes at the municipal level might be rooted in the assumption that as the trained planners or town elected officials, we are afforded a level of skill, opinion, or knowledge that everyday folks just don't have, right? And so there's oftentimes this assumption that the inherent sort of knowledge, wisdom, or experiences that community members are bringing to us are not always seen as valid. And with that comes the assumption that if only we can educate the community more, that will change their behaviors. Oftentimes that doesn't play out as we would like it to. And so we really have to push ourselves to think about how do we leverage the existing experiences and the inherent knowledge that everyday folks have in our work. And I think that what we're seeing as a result of that, so when we think about sort of more conventional tools in community engagement, the surveys, the comment boxes, the informational meetings, too often they might fail to yield actionable or creative suggestions that can improve our initiatives. And oftentimes they also fail to perhaps diffuse anger or controversy and ultimately build trust between public and local officials and their communities. One of the other sort of issues is what the book Dream, Play, Build talks about, the cake approach, right? And so when a municipality says, you know, we've already built this entire program, we're doing this initiative no matter what, this process is fully baked. Now, would you like to just add your 2 cents? And so sometimes community members might feel, well, how much does my voice matter if this thing is already happening with or without my voice? So thinking a little bit more about how can we get more feedback and from the community at the beginning stages of the process is really important. Lily talked a little bit about this, but I just want to emphasize so much of the work that we do from community engagement can really be exclusive by design. So it's not necessarily our fault. It's really the way the system has been designed for a long time. When we think about the times that meetings are hosted, the types of hostilities that exist, that isn't exactly accessible to everybody. And finally, the final point that I really want to take a deeper dive into is this notion that language as the major form of expression is not always inclusive. And so the book that I'm going to be sharing more about soon is called Dream, Play, Build. And in it, it really draws on some research around the psychology of language as the primary form of expression. And so first, it talks about how there are different cultural biases and expectations that folks have around public speaking, right? Public speaking is such an integral part of local activism and community engagement. But the reality is that there's still a huge fear for many when it comes to public speaking. It's still one of the biggest fears that folks have. And it's not the preferred mode of expression, depending on your cultural background, and especially for folks that might be neurodivergent as well. And also, language is often too open-ended. It's one thing to ask someone, what do you want to see in your community? Or, for example, asking your child when they come home, how was school? You might know their answer to, they'll keep it really simple. They'll say it was good. But if you were to ask them, draw me a picture of your day at school, oftentimes the results are drastically different. You end up getting the nuance, the details, and the color that you wouldn't normally from a language approach. And so I'm here today to really offer an alternative, to offer a method in which you all can bring into your work if you so choose, from the work of James Rojas and John Camp, who authored this book here called Dream, Play, Build. I'm really excited. My colleague, I just want to give her a shout out again. Joyce Mandel brought this to Abundant Housing just this year, and it's been really transformative to the way that we approach our community engagement and activism work. And basically, Dream, Play, Build is a tactical method of community engagement that really seeks to inspire creativity by using 5 senses, by using all of our senses and various techniques. I'm going to share an overview of this work and offer some practical examples. We'll also have an opportunity, as I mentioned, to engage and play with this method, to try it out. But I do just want to mention, if you want a deeper dive into this book, I really encourage you to purchase and read it. It's just a fantastic resource. So going a little bit more into the science behind Dream, Play, Build, because there's some really interesting research that's outlined in the book that offers lessons for the modes of engagement that we use in our community engagement efforts. So the book talks about when we're using predominantly language-based engagement, right? So we're things like public testimony, things like even writing a letter to your town official. This actually engages our prefrontal cortex, which is mostly in the fight, flight, and freeze response. And so oftentimes the book talks about how this will generate more deficit-based ideas and really keeps us in survival mode. particularly if you think about the fact that, for example, someone might have sat through traffic to get to your meeting, right? So they're often going to generate those types of responses. The opposite of that is that when we engage in a more sensorial approach or play-based engagement that's hands-on, we actually are engaging our bodies. So we're engaging somatically in different parts of our brain. And that can actually unlock new ideas and expansive ways of thinking. And so the notion is that this really taps into people's intuitive knowledge and core creativity, but it can also diffuse anger, frustration, polarizing opinions that people so often bring to planning meetings. And the entire point is that people experience their places, their cities, their towns through their senses and emotions, right? They don't experience a place through technical jargon and expertise. And so it's really drawing on that notion, as Lily was talking about earlier. And I think that we can probably all come up with an example of how language-based engagement, right? Often we're hearing about traffic, overcrowding, training the town's resources, less parking. It's really rooted in fear rather than fostering the possibility. And so what does this look like in practice? So the book Dream, Play, Build offers a methodology called Place It. And there are 3 different methods that I wanted to share with you today to just give you some possibility models and a little bit of a how-to if you wanted to bring this into your own work. So the first is model building. And so model building basically asks participants to build memories or ideal spaces and places with found objects. So what I mean by found objects are things like buttons, Legos, bottle caps, pipe cleaners, toilet paper rolls, you name it. You can see some materials here on the screen. And really, the purpose of sort of starting with a memory is to build community and build trust, particularly if you have a group of folks who don't know each other well. And some of the objectives that this method in particular has been used for are visioning processes for both mid and long-term planning projects, creating shared goals, values, or vision and mission statements. That's actually something that we've done at Abundant Housing that has been really successful, is using this method for brand new pro-housing groups or coalitions that are just coming together and really setting a roadmap for themselves. This method can also be used to galvanize people on a specific issue, and of course, team building and bonding. So this one is really fun and very hands-on. So again, what does that look like in practice? Well, this is a sample agenda that the book offers and one that we've used in the past. And essentially, it's really important that sort of in your Dream, Play, Build engagements, you really offer reflection time at the beginning and end. You offer folks the opportunity to work on their own at the beginning, but then also coming together into teams. And also, I really like that Lily mentioned this, really having a strong facilitator that can draw out reoccurring themes, close the learning loop, and take live notes. So this is just a little bit of a sample of what that looks like in practice, doing a model building workshop. Next, we have the pop-up model. And so no matter how interactive a public meeting is or how fun or accessible, it's still a meeting, right? And people need to take time out of their day or night to attend. The pop-up model is really about meeting people where they are, as Lily was mentioning too earlier. It's bringing the Place It method, or it's bringing your method of engagement to them. And so the book really offers some amazing examples of how planners or town officials have brought this technique to laundromats, bodegas, train and transit stations, grocery stores, barbershops, you name it. This is really a great way to reach folks that are beyond the usual suspects. And essentially, it's a to-go version of your engagement. Oftentimes in the sort of realm of planning, it might look like what you see on the screen, which is bringing a larger scale installation or model into community spaces and basically asking folks to interact with that model. So some of the objectives that you might see for this method are informing an existing plan or project, and again, reaching new audiences and really building that buy-in and community trust. So how to, these are just some quick steps that are in the book. Of course, there is more detail, but it's really about determining your goals, site location, and target audience. Who are you hoping to reach? Building a very loose version of the model and scale. It doesn't have to be exact, but just giving folks a better sort of visual understanding of what's being proposed. Making sure that you have accurate, enough staff to record and document live with Post-its, interviews, photos, etc. And then hosting that pop-up for 2 to 4 hours max. So this is definitely, this can be a very, this is a very tiring method, if you will, sometimes, because it's a lot of engagement with a lot of folks that can be really fast. And so definitely want to host something for no more than 2 to 4 hours. The last method is site exploration. And so this is where participants explore a physical space on a multi-sensory level. So you may have seen this in the past as a walking tour. This is something that I really want to try at Abundant Housing. We haven't been able to yet, but I know, for example, a pro-housing group in Connecticut called Desegregate Connecticut, they will often use walking tours and walking audits to really dream and think about how an existing space can be transformed. And so oftentimes the objectives for this method could be informing a comprehensive planning process, could think about what zoning changes specific areas of your community might need. And again, auditing or, offering a needs assessment of an existing space. And so in terms of how to lead a site exploration, you really want to think about what are the objectives and number of sites. So it could look like exploring multiple aspects of your neighborhood. You want to offer prompts. And so oftentimes in the book, they will ask folks to find a particular spot that they enjoy most in the site exploration, asking them what do they see, smell, hear, and feel, reflecting on shared stories and memories. Again, it's really important to have appropriate staffing to record reflections. And then oftentimes after this method, folks will move into a more model building exercise to get even a little bit more tangible about the expected outcomes. So I wanted to just offer this example from Abundant Housing. We have used the model building approach a number of times, basically as a method to launch a new pro-housing group. And so this is a photo from a group in Franklin that met in August. This was a community that I know Joyce might be here on the call, but Joyce worked with and started out with just 1 or 2 advocates and has since grown to a leadership team of 6 and a group slightly larger than that. I think there's at least 10 folks there. And we were able to use the model building workshop to essentially establish the initial mission and vision statement that the leadership team is now using to establish goals and tactics. And so this has been a really important model for us in working with groups that are brand new to each other, that haven't met, building that trust and establishing that initial infrastructure of a brand new group of advocates. Okay, so now we are going to try this out. I'm going to ask for your participation if you're willing and able by using Jamboard. So actually, I'm going to just expand my screen here for a moment. By show of hands, are there any folks here that have used Jamboard before on Google? Okay, no worries. There is an alternative if you'd rather not use Jamboard. But basically, we are going to take about 3 minutes. We're going to keep this really quick so that we can have time for discussion. We're going to take 3 minutes to draw, map, or build your favorite memory in your town. So what does that look like using all 5 senses? And then we'll come back together and share. If you would rather not use Jamboard, I would welcome you to just write down your thoughts. I know that's still sort of the language-based engagement, but really drawing on those 5 senses to share your thoughts can really unlock some new ideas for you. For folks that would like to use Jamboard, Jamboard is essentially a online whiteboard in which you can copy and paste photos from Google or from your desktop. You can write down words, whatever you'd like. It's basically like a digital collage or whiteboard. And actually, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to do a quick demo. But while I do this, I would encourage all of you to think about the answer to this prompt of your favorite memory in town. Okay, so this is Jamboard. And essentially, if you want to use Jamboard, your main navigation frame is here on the left-hand side where you see this text box, you see a photo, you see a sticky note. You can add sticky notes to your Jamboard. You can upload photos here, or you can copy and paste directly from Google. But this is essentially how you would use Jamboard is on the left-hand side, your navigation panel. Before we jump into this activity, are there any questions about Jamboard or the activity?
Kassie, I don't see any hands, so if you want to drop the link in the chat, beautiful, there it is. And then we'll take, what'd you say, like 3 to 5 minutes for us to play with this, and then we'll come back together and discuss?
Yes, let's take 3 minutes. So we'll come back together at 11:14, and would welcome any folks to share what they came up with. I will also share my screen with the directions.
It looks like it's saying that I need to request access. So I don't know if you need to adjust the sharing permissions. Is anyone else getting that when you click on the link in the chat? Yeah.
Give me 1 second. Okay, let me update that. Sorry about that.
It's okay. I can't tell you how many times I've done that.
It's Google. It's the Google permissions that are such a pain.
Well, it's like different for every format.
Okay, it should be updated now. Is it working?
Did not the first time. Is the link slightly different now that the permissions have changed? Do you want to try sharing the link again, seeing if it's the same?
Let me see. Oh, I think it's because it's the copy. It's not working. Okay, I think in light of this, I apologize, everyone. I feel like we can just scratch the Jamboard. And why don't we just have folks respond to the prompt as they'd like? So I will copy and paste the prompt into the chat. And if any images come up, you can just describe them or just describe your favorite memory. So let's give folks until about 11:16 to think about this, and then we'll come together and close out. Thanks everyone for your flexibility. Wow, thank you so much, everyone. These are great. Thank you for sharing in the chat. I'm noticing a theme of a lot of outdoors, a lot of memories outdoors. Great job just really leveraging the five senses. I think being outdoors, I'm noticing also like public spaces, public parks, public resources such as the water, the beach, the lake. That's beautiful. We have a lot in common in this space. Great. Would anyone like to share out loud? Totally fine if not. But I wanted to make space for that before we go into Q&A. Yes, Elizabeth, hi.
Good morning, everybody. I'm gonna share my two favorite recent moments because they're the most community organized, which was during COVID when the high school students couldn't have a graduation, so they set up a parade route and stood along the side of the road as the graduates drove by. And then also for little kids, the fire department and the police department would send a car and a truck, and we'd all line up and follow them to the kids' house for their birthday parties. And so those are my favorite because they're a sign of the community coming together. And also, I got engaged on Bank Street. But that's
Yes, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. That's beautiful. I love like the community building connectedness around that. I think I'm noticing a theme of that as well in what everyone's sharing in the chat. It's around relationship building, community building, just being with each other. And I feel like, especially if folks are trick-or-treating today or over the weekend, like I've always thought of trick-or-treating as a community building model. Coming together for the kids. So I want to thank you all so much for your participation. I'm so sorry the Jamboard didn't work out, but loved seeing all of your memories in the chat. I hope this was generative and that I offered a few new ideas. I wanted to just offer folks the chance to ask any questions before we end today for myself or Lily.
Thank you both so much, Kassie and Lily, for very, very important and different perspectives on community engagement. And I think we all know that rolling with the punches and adapting on the fly is a big part of community engagement, and you just keep smiling and you make it work. Thank you all so much for sharing. These are such beautiful memories. And I think really the heart of a lot of the things that we try to get at with community engagement. Yes, we have a couple of minutes left. So if anyone has questions, feel free to ask them now. We have the resources of both Kassie and Lily's expertise. And then I'll wrap up with just some closing thoughts. But this is your time. We've given you quite a bit to think through. So anything that's lingering, anything that you'd like to ask us. Donna, go ahead.
Hi, Donna Kalanick Brewster. So in our community, we have done a lot of what you're suggesting. And I guess my question is, if you do all that and you're still lacking a percentage of the voices that need to be heard, how do you bring their perspective in without them actually having taken part in a survey or come to a forum, but in many cases through multiple planning processes that their voice is important. So I guess, is there a way to still represent their voice even if they didn't get an opportunity to speak?
That is a great question, Donna. Kassie or Lily, I'll let either of you take a stab at that one.
Yeah, I mean, my first thought is whenever possible to try to have some direct one-on-one conversations with those folks, especially if there have been moments where you were able to engage them and hear from them and saw how important their voice was to the process. Taking the time to reach out to them directly and have those one-on-one conversations about, you know, what is it about the way that we're doing community engagement now that is preventing you from participating more fully and continuously, and how might we be able to make these shifts to be able to get that kind of participation more regularly. You know, I think it is true that there are, at the end of the day, folks with young kids, you know, people who work unusual hours. There are always going to be people who it is just not possible to have them be as engaged as others. You know, and that's unfortunate at times, but is a reality that we have to contend with. But I think the more we can have those one-on-one conversations and really understand what's going on behind the scenes is always helpful. And then in terms of being able to represent them, I think, you know, if you do have folks who are willing to share stories anonymously, personal stories, and you get their permission, you know, to reshare them with, you know, maybe certain details taken out, you know, we want to make sure that we're following their lead in terms of what they're comfortable with, but being able to bring those stories into other spaces that they might not be able to themselves be in. So those are the first two things that come to mind. But Kassie, what would you add?
I agree with everything you said, Lily. I think too, something I didn't get to talk about that we've been somewhat successful at in terms of reaching folks is like just text banking and door knocking. So going back to kind of those community organizing and activism approaches that are more grassroots, I think that is a chance at meeting folks where they are, especially text banking. It's a little bit less like intimidating. But I do think, as Lily said, sometimes we won't reach everyone. I think we also sometimes might have to respect that some folks don't want to engage. I think that there's an entire history of behind political participation. I think I can speak for myself as like a woman of color, that in which we just feel really invisible and like our voices don't matter maybe. So it's not anyone's fault here, right? Like there's an entire history that's weighing down on us, and that won't change overnight. But I think the more you sort of practice with these approaches and doing the work that you're already doing, thank you, Donna, I think gradually, hopefully you'll see a shift there.
Thank you, Kassie and Lily. Ward, I'll come to you next.
Okay, thanks. My name's Ward Gorey. I'm from Orleans. I was interested in how you translate, how you pick up themes and move those themes in the direction of the project that you're actually trying to do. I mean, if you look at some of the themes in the chat, can you just sort of spot check some themes that you would identify and then use to get the conversation more and more focused on the project at hand?
Sure. And I will just say that I am not a planner by trade. I might be one day, but I definitely encourage Ward. I encourage you, Ward, to buy the book Dream Play Build, and I'll try to find the website that also offers some inspiring stories, because it's chock full of actual examples of how these models have been implemented in different planning processes. I would say establishing a base level understanding of the values that people hold dear when it comes to the spaces and places that are around them, I think can help highlight what are the important things that we want out of this project. So, for example, seeing almost everyone talk about like a public space, preserving maybe like open space in projects might be like a really important thing. For example, even in Haverhill right now, we are we are considering density bonuses for projects that meet certain requirements and for projects that preserve X amount of open space. And that was actually as a result of a community engagement survey that the city did. So that's just like a really small example. I'm sorry I don't have more for you, but I really encourage you to buy the book. This has been a method they've been using, I think, for the better part of like 20 years to great success, because there are a fair amount of skeptics. Ward, just to be fair, like there's people who say, how can playing and doing all this fun stuff lead to anything tangible, right? There's understandable skepticism, but there's some really powerful examples in the book. So I'll add a link to their website here in the chat as well.
Yeah, I think I would just add that I totally second the point about trying to get to folks' underlying values. And really, in general, I think whenever we can start the conversation as like big and broad and dreamy as possible, and slowly kind of get down into some kind of concrete idea. So like looking at these answers in the chat, the things that stand out to me, like Kassie said, are public space. I heard a lot of people mention their grandchildren. Many folks live very far away from their grandchildren because their kids couldn't afford to move back close to their parents and raise their kids where they grew up. And so that disconnect, that generational disconnect, is a real issue. I mean, I could have a whole other thing about that and the sandwich generation and how parents aren't getting enough support because their families are so far away. I'll do another session on that. But, to me, it's like, okay, a lot of folks in this space really value spending time with their grandkids. That's something I can latch onto and say, well, did you know that making it easier to create more accessory dwelling units is a great way to encourage intergenerational living that still allows independence for all parties? And being able to say, well, here's some of the policies that we could pass or some of the projects that we could create that would enable us to have more of what you've already said that you love. So I think that also just simple things like the images you use when you're putting together a presentation. Oh, a lot of people mentioned parks. Okay, let's make sure we have some pictures of, our beloved parks in this community. A lot of people mentioned this, the farmers market. Let's get an image of there. Having people feel like, okay, I recognize what you all are talking about and how it connects to my life. Noticing the language that people use and trying to mirror that language in your own communications. So I think it's a great question and really is in many ways kind of at the heart of this whole process is how do we take these like big ideas and turn them into tangible policies. So yeah, I could keep talking, but that's what I'll say for now.
Thank you again, Kassie and Lily. We are coming up on time and I want to be respectful of everybody's days. So I'm going to do a little bit of wrapping up and pulling out of themes of my own. And really what I took away from listening to both of our presenters speak today was that community engagement really goes beyond just an initial or an initiative or a specific project. And it's really sort of baked into everything that municipalities are doing. And so being aware of our audience, whether it's in a planning board meeting and explaining why a particular applicant is before the board, whether it's making sure people understand, that public comment is public comment and the board isn't going to respond to questions, making sure that information is easy to find and in one place so people can get caught up if they're coming in halfway through the process. How do we make decisions as a town? What are our values? And, Donna mentioned some long-term planning processes. Most of the towns, all the towns in the Lower and Outer Cape region are working on foundational or guiding documents, whether those are local comprehensive plans or housing production plans, housing needs assessments, open space and recreation plans. Those are all based on community engagement as well. And so keeping all of those things present as we have these conversations, like we're doing community engagement every time we're doing anything. And the more we sort of spread it through all of the work we do as town government, helps then make it easier when we do have something specific, whether it's housing as a strategy or anything else we care about as a community. I really also love this idea of ground rules and explaining what's the expectation for the meeting, what's on the table, what isn't on the table, what are the opportunities for people to participate, how are their voices going to be used as part of the decision-making process, so that people feel empowered to use their voices and want to keep coming back and being part of it. I am going to send out a follow-up email with this recording, with the slide decks, and whatever other resources might be useful. Thank you all again so much for taking the time to be here. I think there's no better group of people on Cape Cod who understand the importance of really reaching all of the different demographics that we need to hear from and that are impacted, especially by our long-term decision-making, and making sure that our region and the Cape stays viable and vibrant and sustainable, not just now, but 20, 30, 50, 100 years into the future. And we have a hand in that in the decisions that we make today. So thank you all again. Have a wonderful day. Happy Halloween, if anyone's going trick-or-treating. And if you have any questions, I am always available via email, and Cassie and Lily put their emails in the chat as well.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Bye.